Hello, dear students. I am Professor Mohammad Masood Ahmad. It's my legal classes. And today's topic is common law remedies against the pollution, trespass, negligence, and theories of strict liability and absolute liability. It is the unit number 2 of the subject called environmental law. It is there in Usman University LLB syllabus and most of the universities in India. So today we are going to have some orientation about this unit number 2 of the syllabus. Let's talk about common law remedies against the pollution. Uh, the tortious remedy available are trespass, nuisance, strict liability, and negligence. The statutory remedies incorporate citizens' suit, example, an activity brought under Section 19 of the Environmental Protection Act 1886, an activity under Area 133, Criminal Procedure Code 1973. A common law action for the negligence may be brought to prevent the environmental pollution. In an action for the negligence, the plaintiff must show that the defendant was under a duty to take the reasonable care to avoid the damage complained of. There was a breach of his duty, and the breach of duty caused the damage. So when the plaintiff is going to the court, there should be a proof that the defendant has breached the duty and the breach of duty caused and the damage. So these issues are there for the plaintiff if he is going for the petition. For the common remedies, there are two important concepts. One is the strict liability and second one is the absolute liability. Because these liabilities we are supposed to determine in order to have the outcome or the judgment of the case under environmental issues. The rule of strict liability was laid down in the year 1868. According to this, the rule in this case, it was laid down that any person keeping any hazardous substance on his premises would be held liable if that substance escapes from there and harms other, maybe the neighbors or the third party, if it is harmful for them. Then the second point is strict liability determines that one must be responsible for the damages incurred by the use of hazardous objects, the escape, and unnatural use of soil, with some exceptions. Then the next point, under the strict liability rule, the law makes people pay compensation for the damages even if they are not at fault. In other words, the people have to pay the compensation to victims even if they took all the necessary precautions. In fact, the permission allowing such activities often includes this principle as a precondition. Then we have the second important concept, as I've told you, after strict liability, it is the absolute liability in environmental pollution. The absolute liability of a person not only includes the compensation to the victims of population, but also the cost of restoring the environment degradation. This principle is called the polluter pays the principle. So here the liability is more comprehensive than the strict liability. In case of absolute liability, the victims will be paid the compensation, and after that, he has got the defendant has got the responsibility of restoring the environmental degradation if that happens. So this principle we call it as a polluter pays principle. Principle of absolute liability makes the individual absolutely liable for the damage caused by the escape of hazardous substance without any exception, irrespective of individual intent in causing such damage or harm. The difference between the what I can say the strict liability and absolute liability, in case of strict liability there are certain conditions, okay, and certain exceptions. But here in absolute liability, we don't consider the exceptions. So this is the major difference. Absolute liability is the responsibility without fault or negligence. Absolute liability crimes are those that can be punished without a finding of means rea, the state of mind and criminal intent. If they may be criminal intent, may not be criminal intent, but the defendant is responsible for this one. Then, if any harm is accused, if any harm is caused, the person who is practicing such activity will be absolutely liable. This concept of absolute liability becomes the backbone of many upcoming environmental laws and was used as precedent while deciding Bhopal gas tragedy case, which was a major disaster in India. Strict and absolute liability in environmental law. These two principles, doctorians, have the similar significance with some differences. Under the principle of strict liability, the compensation for damage is determined based on the nature and extent of loss suffered. However, in case of absolute culpability, the exemplary damage must be awarded. It is strict in nature. That I'm talking about the absolute liability is the more strict than the strict liability. Then law of crime for the evidence enforcement of law. Law of crime for enforcement of law. Section 268 of the Indian Penal Code 1860 defines the term public nuisance, and section 290 of IPC makes public nuisance punishable. Thus, under this provision, if any act or omission causing injury to any person by polluting the environment takes place, the same can be subjected to prosecution. Thank you, friends. This is the introduction to the chapter called Common Remedies Available for the Environmental Protection. Particularly, we were discussing the concept of strict liability and absolute liability. Both the concepts are very, very important in order to determine not only the violation of environment, the protection of environment. So this is very, very important. Dear student, all the best, and we'll be meeting for the next class. Thank you. All the best.